Hello everyone, how are you all? I hope you are all doing well. Now this is a continuation of what we have learned in our last class. Amma meeku gurtunte we have actually started breathing and exchange of gases. Dantlo nenu introduction, what are the respiratory structures in lower organisms. Then we have also learned about human respiratory system parts నేర్చుకున్నాము. Now we are going to learn today about mechanism of respiration. So before that, let's see what are the steps involved in breathing. If you remember last week or last time నేను మీకు టీచ్ చేసినప్పుడు what is breathing, I gave you definition of breathing or ventilation, external, internal respiration, cellular respiration, anaerobic and aerobic respiration. ఈ definitions అన్ని ఇచ్చినాను. If you have not listened to that video, please go back and listen. So today's class is continuation of what we have learned in the previous class. So what are the steps in breathing? You can see there are 5 steps in breathing. Ante once the air enters into our respiratory tract, then what happens? So first step is breathing or ventilation. So as you know, what is breathing? The air from outside, that is oxygen, enters into our nostrils. At the same time, carbon dioxide goes out. You have to remember always that oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged simultaneously. So the first step is breathing or ventilation, through which the air enters and exits. Inhalation, exhalation will take place at the same time. Then once the air reaches the lungs, you all know alveoli is the structural and functional units of the lungs. So air ఏమవుతుందమ్మా ఇక్కడ నుంచి it enters the lungs, lungs నుంచి alveoli ki the air will enter. After that, what happens is immediately the gases will transport between the alveoli and the blood. Let's take oxygen. Oxygen okkasari it enters the alveoli, there is an exchange between the alveoli and the blood. Now how does this exchange takes place? Always remember, exchange takes place through a simple process, and that is simple diffusion. And it is a passive process, it doesn't require much of energy. As you all know, how do we define diffusion? The movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to lower concentration. So ikkada concentration చూస్తే ఎక్కడ higher concentration ఉందమ్మా, lungs లో higher concentration ఉంది. అక్కడ నుంచి the oxygen enters the next part, that is the blood. In blood, what will happen? The blood will carry the oxygen. So there is diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and tissues. ఒకసారి blood లో oxygen వచ్చేసిన తర్వాత the blood carries oxygen to the tissues. టిష్యూస్ దగ్గర ఏమవుతుంది? దెర్ ఇస్ ట్రాన్స్పోర్ట్, ద ఆక్సిజన్ ఇస్ డెలివర్డ్ టు ద టిష్యూస్. సో అల్టిమేట్లీ ఆక్సిజన్ టిష్యూస్ లో రీచ్ అయిపోతుంది. వన్స్ ది ఆక్సిజన్ రీచెస్ ద టిష్యూస్, ద లాస్ట్ స్టెప్ విల్ హ్యాపెన్. వాట్ ఈస్ ద లాస్ట్ స్టెప్? ఇఫ్ యూ కెన్ సీ, యూటిలైజేషన్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ బై ద సెల్. నౌ దిస్ ఇస్ ది అల్టిమేట్ పర్పస్ కదా. ఆక్సిజన్ అసలు ఎందుకు అవసరము టిష్యూస్ కి అంటే, ద టిష్యూస్ విల్ యూటిలైజ్ ది ఆక్సిజన్ ఫర్ ద ఆక్సిడేషన్ ఆఫ్ ఫుడ్ స్టఫ్ or for the oxidation of food material. Food material ni break down cheyali ante oxygen avasaramu. So in this process, what is released? Energy is released, and that energy is utilized for various metabolic activities. At the same time, inkem produce aitadamma, oxygen is utilized, we also see carbon dioxide is produced. As you all know, in the last class also I told you, carbon dioxide shouldn't remain in the cells or the tissues or in our body for a longer time, because as I told you, it's a poisonous gas. Ante idi malli it has to go out, it shouldn't remain in our body for the long time. So emautadi, simultaneously oxygen gets into the lungs and it is used up, carbon dioxide is formed in the tissues and it comes out through exhalation. So these are the steps involved in breathing. Let's see the mechanism of breathing. Now mechanism lo there are two stages. One is inspiration and the other is expiration. You all know what is inspiration. Inspiration is we inhale oxygen into our body, and expiration is we exhale or we remove that carbon dioxide whatever is produced outside the body. So these are the two processes. If you can see, there are some points I have written. We'll quickly go through what is inspiration. So first point, as I wrote, inspiration is an active process. Now what do you mean by active process? Any process which requires energy. Now while we breathing, ఇప్పుడు మీరు క్లాస్ వినేటప్పుడు కూడా మనం ఇలా బ్రీత్ చేస్తున్నప్పుడు యూ కెన్ సీ దట్ వీఆర్ యూజింగ్ అవర్ మసిల్స్. అంటే మసిల్స్ అక్కడ వర్క్ అవ్వాలి అంటే మసిల్స్ రిక్వైర్ ఎనర్జీ. So active process means a process which is requiring energy. Inspiration is an energy requiring process. So we are calling it as active process. And you know how much time it takes for inspiration? Just 2 seconds. ఇప్పుడు నేను మాట్లాడే లోపల మీరు వినే లోపల కూడా you have already inspired, right? And the next one is which muscles are involved in respiration. అమ్మ గుర్తుపెట్టుకోండి, ఇన్స్పిరేషన్ కన్నా ఎక్స్పిరేషన్ కన్నా 2 different types of muscles are important. Now which muscles? The muscles of the diaphragm. You all know about the diaphragm. Always remember, mana respiration low 2 types of muscles. The muscles of the diaphragm and muscles of the ribs are very, very important. Muscles of the diaphragm are called phrenic muscles, and there is another type of muscles which are rib muscles. I think in short form lo rasnanama external intercostal muscles. External intercostal muscles are muscles of the ribs. అయితే మసిల్స్ ఆఫ్ ద రిబ్స్ కూడా 2 types ఉంటాయి. ఎక్స్టర్నల్ ఇంటర్కోస్టల్ మసిల్స్, ఇంటర్నల్ ఇంటర్కోస్టల్ మసిల్స్. మన ఇన్స్పిరేషన్ కి ఏం అవసరము అంటే ఫ్రీనిక్ మసిల్స్ విచ్ ఇస్ మసిల్స్ ఆఫ్ ద డయాఫ్రమ్ అండ్ ఎక్స్టర్నల్ ఇంటర్కోస్టల్ మసిల్స్ ఆఫ్ ద రిబ్స్. ఇన్స్పిరేషన్ లో ఏమవుతుంది? దీస్ మసిల్స్ ఆర్ కాంట్రాక్టింగ్. నౌ యు ఆల్ నో దట్ మసిల్స్ కాంట్రాక్ట్ అండ్ రిలాక్స్. కాంట్రాక్ట్ అయినప్పుడు volume of the thoracic cavity will increase. If you remember in my last class I told you how is this thoracic cavity formed. మీకు గుర్తుందా ఎలా ఫామ్ అవుతుంది thoracic cavity? With the help of the vertebral column, with the help of the ribs, right? A thoracic chamber is formed. One thoracic chamber or thoracic cavity is formed. అయితే how will this volume of the thoracic cavity, how is this volume of the thoracic cavity formed? Okkasari chuddam. Now in this diagram, if you see, I've written this is anterior end of the thoracic cavity, posterior end, ventral side and dorsal side. Aithe ee inspiration appudu this entire volume of the lungs will expand. వాల్యూమ్ ఆఫ్ ద లంగ్స్ ఎక్స్పాండ్ అవుతుంది, థొరాసిక్ క్యావిటీ కూడా ఎక్స్పాండ్ అవుతుంది. ఎలా అంటే లాస్ట్ టైం ఐ టోల్డ్ యూ థొరాసిక్ క్యావిటీ అండ్ లంగ్స్ ఆర్ వెరీ క్లోజ్ టు ఈచ్ అదర్. సో థొరాసిక్ క్యావిటీ వాల్యూమ్ ఇంక్రీజ్ అయితే లంగ్స్ వాల్యూమ్ కూడా ఇంక్రీజ్ అవుతుంది. బికాస్ దే ఆర్ ఇన్ వెరీ క్లోజ్ ప్రాక్సిమిటీ ఆర్ అవి దగ్గరకు ఉన్నందుకు ఒకటి ఇంక్రీజ్ అయితే ఇంకోటి కూడా ఇంక్రీజ్ అయినట్లనే. సో నౌ లెట్స్ సీ హౌ ఇస్ దిస్ వాల్యూమ్ ఇంక్రీజింగ్. యూ కెన్ సీ హియర్ ఐ రోట్. We'll see, first of all, we'll see the structure of the diaphragm. Remember, the structure of the diaphragm is domed shape. Aithe during inspiration, this domed shape diaphragm will relax. Relax ante ila kindiki vachesthundi. Right? The diaphragm comes down. Idi kindiki rangane what happens is the volume increases in anterior posterior end. When the diaphragm relaxes or comes down, anterior posterior end lo volume increase aitundi. At the same time, when the muscles of the ribs contract, the volume increases or expands in ventral and dorsal side. Or dorsoventral side increase aitundi. Remember, when the diaphragm is moving, anterior posterior end volume increase aitundi ante ila increase aitundi. When the ribs are contracting, the volume increases in dorsoventral ante ila. So now the entire thoracic cavity has increased in volume just like a balloon. సో థొరాసిక్ క్యావిటీ ఇంక్రీజ్ అయిందంటే లంగ్ వాల్యూమ్ కూడా ఇంక్రీజ్ అయినట్టే. ఈ లంగ్ వాల్యూమ్ ఇంక్రీజ్ అయినప్పుడు వాట్ హ్యాపెన్స్ ఇస్ the pressure inside the lungs will decrease. Now ikkada you should all remember Boyle's law. I guess you might have learned Boyle's law in physics. According to Boyle's law, what does it say? Volume is inversely proportional. Oh, I'm sorry. So according to Boyle's law, what does it say? Pressure is inversely proportional to volume. This is what Boyle's law says. So this is volume of thoracic cavity. Aithe pressure ekkuvaithe volume taggutadi. In the same way, ikkada chudandi em avutundi, here the volume is increasing, that means the pressure decreases. So whenever the thoracic cavity volume is increasing, the pressure inside the lungs decreases, or intrapulmonary pressure will decrease according to Boyle's law. సో దీన్ని మనం నెగటివ్ ప్రెషర్ అనవచ్చు. నెగటివ్ ప్రెషర్ అంటే ఏంటి? ప్రెషర్ లోపల లంగ్స్ లోపల ఇంట్రా పల్మనరీ ప్రెషర్ తగ్గినప్పుడు నెగటివ్ ప్రెషర్ అంటాము. సో వెన్ దెర్ ఇస్ అ నెగటివ్ ప్రెషర్ హియర్, వాట్ హ్యాపెన్స్ ఇస్ ద ఎయిర్ ఫ్రమ్ అవుట్ సైడ్ ఇస్ పుష్డ్ ఇన్సైడ్. అంటే బయట ఎలా ఉంది? హౌ ఇస్ ది అట్మాస్ఫియరిక్ ఎయిర్? ద ప్రెషర్ అవుట్ సైడ్ ఈస్ మోర్ పాజిటివ్ ప్రెషర్ అండ్ ప్రెషర్ ఇన్సైడ్ ఇస్ నెగటివ్. దెర్ ఇస్ అ ప్రెషర్ గ్రేడియంట్. గ్రేడియంట్ అంటే ఏంటమ్మా? బయట లోపల చూస్తే బయట ప్రెషర్ ఎట్లుంది? హై ప్రెషర్ ఉంది. ఆక్సిజన్ది ప్రెషర్ ఎక్కువ ఉంది, లోపల ప్రెషర్ తక్కువ ఉంది. సో దెర్ ఇస్ అ డిఫరెన్స్ ఆర్ ప్రెషర్ గ్రేడియంట్. ఈ ప్రెషర్ గ్రేడియంట్ వల్లనే ద ఎయిర్ మూవ్స్ ఫ్రమ్ అవుట్ సైడ్ టు ఇన్సైడ్. ఆల్వేస్ రిమెంబర్, in our body the gases will move whenever there is a pressure gradient. అంటే ఒక ఏరియాలో ఎక్కువ ఒక ఏరియాలో తక్కువ ప్రెషర్ ఉన్నప్పుడు, ఆర్ దాని కాన్సన్ట్రేషన్ ఎక్కువ తక్కువ ఉన్నప్పుడు, the movement always happens from a region of higher to lower concentration. That is diffusion I'm talking about. సో ఇక్కడ కూడా through simple diffusion process, బయట ఎలా ఉంది? Atmospheric pressure is high and inside the pressure is less, so there is a pressure gradient. The air enters from a region of high to lower concentration. So simple diffusion method. So this is what happens during inspiration. Now let's see the exact opposite happens during expiration. What is expiration? When we are exhaling air or carbon dioxide when it is going out, this process is called expiration. So you can see it is a passive process. Ante deeniki energy avasram ledu. Why? Because during passive process, why are we saying passive process? Ee time lo muscles are actually relaxing. సో రిలాక్స్ అవ్వడానికి ఏటీపీ అంతా అవసరం లేదు, ఆర్ ఎనర్జీ అంతా అవసరం లేదు. సో దట్స్ వై దిస్ ఇస్ అ passive process. And if you see how much time is it taking, it is just taking 3 seconds. And what happens during this time? The phrenic muscles and the external intercostal muscles are relaxing. Relaxing ante enti chudandi, ila unna diaphragm, the diaphragm which got relaxed or flat, amma dini manam flat kuda anochu. ఫ్లాట్ ఎప్పుడైంది? ఇన్స్పిరేషన్ అప్పుడు డయాఫ్రమ్ ఫ్లాట్ అయిపోయింది. అదే ఎక్స్పిరేషన్ అప్పుడు ద డయాఫ్రమ్ కమ్స్ బ్యాక్ టు నార్మల్. దట్ మీన్స్ అగైన్ ఇట్ కమ్స్ బ్యాక్ టు డూమ్ షేప్, రైట్? సో దిస్ ఇస్ పాజిటివ్ హియర్, డూమ్ షేప్. సో ఇలా డూమ్ షేప్ అయినందుకు, అండ్ దెన్ ద రిబ్స్ ఆల్సో విల్ రిలాక్స్. The muscles of the ribs will relax, the muscles of the diaphragm will relax, thereby the volume inside is decreasing. Volume lopala decrease aindante according to this Boyle's law. When the volume is decreasing, the pressure will increase. Lopala unna pressure em avutadi? Decrease aitadi. Naturally lopala diaphragm normal ga relax ayipoyinappudu lopala em avutadamma? There is a squeezing. So what happens? The pressure increases because of the squeeze, and because of that high pressure, we can also call it as positive pressure. The air goes out. So here also there is a pressure gradient. What is the pressure gradient? Outside there is less of air compared to inside. Inside there is more positive pressure, and the direction of gases is from inside to outside. So again, with the help of pressure gradient, carbon dioxide is moving from in to out. So this is how inspiration and expiration takes place. So I want to add one more point here. Ikkada external intercostal muscles unnai kada, there are other type of muscles which are called as internal intercostal muscles. Internal intercostal muscles are also rib muscles. These rib muscles will get involved during forceful inspiration. Ante konni times manamu we force, sometimes we take extra air like this. తీసుకున్నప్పుడు we use this type of muscles called internal intercostal muscles. But usual గా ఇన్స్పైర్ చేసినప్పుడు, ఎక్స్పైర్ చేసినప్పుడు which muscles do we use? We use external intercostal muscles. Okay, so all of you should remember that this movement of gases always happens whenever there is a pressure gradient. Okay, now let's see, we are talking about pressure gradient. Let's talk about pressure here. Every gas, has a certain kind of pressure which is called as partial pressure. What is a partial pressure? Individual pressure of a gas is called as partial pressure. For example, let me give you, let's say there is a balloon. Now in this balloon there are number of gases. This is gas 1 and this is gas 2. Every gas in a balloon or in a container or in a room, so in a room there are multiple gases. Every gas has its own individual pressure. Ee pressure to em chestayi, these gases will hit the wall. Ikkada they hit the wall of the balloon, or in the closed room they hit the wall of the room. So the pressure with which they are hitting the wall or the balloon, that pressure of the individual gas is called partial pressure. Why am I talking about partial pressure? Because inspiration and expiration and the transport of gases is all depending on the partial pressure. Now partial pressure is denoted by capital P. So if you want to write partial pressure of O2, you write PO2, partial pressure of CO2, PCO2, alane nitrogen PN2, and so on and so forth. But remember, every gas has its own pressure. Our pressure vallane they are able to move from one region to the other. Let's see partial pressure of our two important gases which are important during respiration, and that is oxygen and carbon dioxide. So if you see, first we'll see oxygen. Oxygen, the partial pressure ekkada ekkundama, it is in the atmospheric air. You can see it is 159 mm of Hg. Then when it enters to alveoli, it is 104. Then when it enters the blood, it becomes oxygenated, it becomes 95. Then finally when it is reaching to tissues, it is 40. Now you can get a doubt, how is the partial pressure reducing from atmosphere to tissues? Ikkada 159 undi, ikkada 40 undi. What is happening? Now when the oxygen reaches from atmospheric air and reaches the tissue, here the cells are using the oxygen. Finally, that is the ultimate goal kada. Oxygen reaches the tissues and the tissues will utilize the oxygen. So naturally the partial pressure will reduce. Partial pressure reduce aitundante the amount of oxygen is being utilized for different metabolic activities, right? And you can see in every area there is a pressure difference. ఇక్కడ ఎక్కువ ఉంది, ఇక్కడ తక్కువ ఉంది, ఇక్కడ ఎక్కువ ఉంది, ఇక్కడ తక్కువ ఉంది, ఇక్కడ ఎక్కువ ఉంది, ఇక్కడ తక్కువ ఉంది. ఈ ప్రెషర్ డిఫరెన్స్ వల్లనే the gas moves from one area to the other. As I told you, the movement of air always happens from a region of high to lower concentration. So ikkada chudandi, atmospheric air lo high pressure undi and ikkada low pressure undi. Ee difference vallane the air moves to the next part of the respiratory system, right? Then we come to carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide ekkada form avutundi? Carbon dioxide is formed in the tissue. Let's see the numbers from tissue. When it enters the blood, it becomes deoxygenated and the amount is 45. Akkad nunchi when it is going out, it is 0.3. Again you can see the partial pressure is decreasing. And why is it decreasing? Because of this difference only, carbon dioxide is able to move from tissues to outside, right? Now let's see this entire process. When I'm saying it is all depending upon diffusion, what does diffusion depend upon? There are certain factors which are responsible. Ante 100% diffusion avali, oxygen and carbon dioxide 100% diffusion avali ante all these factors are important. What factors are important? One is solubility, the other is thickness, the other is partial pressure. ఇప్పుడు already we have discussed partial pressure. As I told you, partial pressure is very important for a gas to move from one area to the other. అంటే ఆక్సిజన్ బయట నుంచి లోపలికి రావాలి అంటే there is partial pressure is very important. Always remember, the partial pressure is always high in the area from where it is moving. అంటే atmospheric air లో partial pressure ఎక్కువ ఉంటది, లోపల తక్కువ ఉంటది. So there is a pressure difference. So the oxygen moves from outside to inside. In the same way, carbon dioxide chudandi. Carbon dioxide is moving from tissues to outside. So partial pressure of carbon dioxide ekkada ekku untadi? Tissues lo ekku untadi. When it is moving out, it is low. So there is again a pressure difference, right? So let's see. So we have done with partial pressure. Let's see thickness. The thickness also is responsible for 100% diffusion. Now, what is this thickness we are talking about? Where does actually exchange of gases happen? We all know exchange of gases will happen at the alveoli level, right? So let's draw one alveoli. Now, alveoli is surrounded by blood capillaries, right? Where are these three membranes located? This is the thin layer which is lining the alveoli. What do we have here? We have thin squamous epithelium. This is the first layer. And then we have endothelium. What is endothelium? The epithelium which is lining the blood capillaries, that's the endothelium, that's the second layer. And the membrane which is present between the first and the second layer becomes the third, that is the basement membrane between both of them. So if the gas has to enter or exit, it has to pass through these three layers. అంటే ఈ త్రీ లేయర్స్ ఎలా ఉండాలి? ఎంత థిన్గా ఉంటే అంత సక్సెస్ఫుల్ transport will happen. Remember, these three layers should be very thin. The thinner they are, the easy movement of gases will happen. Usually, it is less than 1 mm. It is less than 1 mm. What is less than 1 mm? The thickness of these three layers is less than 1 mm. ఎంత తక్కువ ఉంటే అంత ఈజీగా gases will move inside out. So these three, we finished thickness, partial pressure and solubility. Now what is solubility? The amount of solute which gets dissolved in a particular amount of solvent, we call it as solubility. Now just like how salt gets dissolved in water quickly, in the same ways the gases should dissolve in the blood very quickly. The faster they get dissolved, the faster they get transported to the tissues or from the tissues to outside. And it is seen that when oxygen and carbon dioxide are compared, carbon dioxide has more solubility, in fact 20 to 25% of more solubility than oxygen. Ante enti? Carbon dioxide, it gets dissolved much faster in the plasma of the blood than oxygen. Faster ga dissolve అయిపోయి it gets transported much faster than oxygen. So the solubility of carbon dioxide is more compared to oxygen, but solubility also is very very important for the diffusion. So solubility, thickness and partial pressure, the three are important for the transport of these gases. I hope you are all understanding. Now let's go to the next topic, and that is transport of oxygen and transport of carbon dioxide. How does it happen? Now all those who are preparing for Neet, you all know that you have to prepare the points from NCERT. I am covering all NCERT points, and let me tell you, whatever I am teaching in this class, 100% of the Neet questions have come from all of this topic. So I want you all to go through this topic that I'm teaching you, and go through all the points. These points are also there in NCERT, and see that you learn everything, because from all these areas questions have been asked. So let's go to the next topic, that is exchange of gases, particularly transport of oxygen and transport of carbon dioxide. Now we know about partial pressure, what is partial pressure, and how does this transport, on what factors will diffusion occur, we have learned. Let's see how is oxygen being transported. Now it seems that 97% of oxygen is transported by RBC. Now you all know about it. You have been learning about this since your lower classes. RBC lo emuntadamma, you all know it. There is hemoglobin. The hemoglobin pigment is considered as oxygen carrier. Quickly, if we go through the structure of hemoglobin, what is a hemoglobin molecule? It is a protein molecule. And how many polypeptide chains are there? So if you quickly look at hemoglobin molecule, let's see the structure. You've already learned it, but let me just revise. So each hemoglobin molecule will have 4 polypeptide chain, and each polypeptide chain will have one heme group. That is, what does the heme group have? The heme group have Fe2 plus, Fe2 plus, which is ferrous. A ferrous group, or the heme group. Here we have Fe. Fe2 plus. 1 minute. Okay. Right. So let me repeat it again. Each hemoglobin molecule will have 4 polypeptide chain, and on each polypeptide chain there is a heme group, and the heme group is having Fe2 plus, the ferrous. To this Fe2 plus, oxygen binds. That means how many oxygen molecules can bind to each hemoglobin molecule? 4 O2 molecules can bind to each hemoglobin molecule. Like that, each RBC will have not hundreds, I'm sorry, some millions of hemoglobin molecule in each RBC, and here hemoglobin acts as the oxygen carrier. Right, so majority 97% of oxygen is transported by RBC, and you can see there's a reaction also I wrote here. Hemoglobin, 4 molecules of hemoglobin bind to 4 molecules of O2 will give you oxyhemoglobin. Let me also highlight this oxyhemoglobin. It's a reversible, this reaction is a reversible reaction. Reversible reaction and entama, this binding takes place at the alveoli region, and then it reaches the tissue, and then this oxyhemoglobin immediately breaks down to release oxygen. So the binding of oxygen to hemoglobin and the breaking of oxyhemoglobin, these are reversible reactions. Binding ekkada jarugutundi, alveoli lo jarugutundi. Breaking or dissociation ekkada jarugutundamma, it happens in the. Okay, so the structure of hemoglobin, as I told you, it's a protein molecule having 4 polypeptide chain. Each polypeptide chain will have a heme group. In the heme group, we have Fe2 plus. This heme group binds to oxygen. How many oxygen molecules? 4 oxygen molecule, and oxyhemoglobin is formed, which I told you, it is a reversible reaction. Where does binding takes place? Binding takes place in the alveoli region, and dissociation takes place in the tissue region. Ultimately, the oxygen is given to the tissues, and the tissues will use that oxygen for different metabolic activities. Alane, when we come to transport of carbon dioxide, as I told you in the beginning, 20 to 25% of carbon dioxide is transported by RBC, 70% is by forming bicarbonate ions, and 7% is through plasma. Remember, this entire slide is very important for Neet point of view. Now, if you see, hemoglobin binds to carbon dioxide and forms a reversible compound, and it is called carbamino hemoglobin. Binding, where does it takes place? The binding takes place near the tissue level, because carbon dioxide is formed in the tissue. Akkada binding jarugutundi. Then where does dissociation happens? Dissociation happens once the carbon dioxide reaches the alveoli level, right? Now let's go to, now we know about transport of oxygen, which majorly happens in the, or happens with the help of RBC. Let's see how transport of carbon dioxide is happening. Right. So I want you to see this. We are going to learn this, how transport of carbon dioxide is going to happen inside. As you know, 70% is by formation of bicarbonate ion. So we'll see this, how will this method or reaction happen. Now these are tissues, as you can see here. Let's say these are tissues, or these are cells. these are these are the cells of the tissues. Now the tissues will perform their metabolic activities, and they produce carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide, this enters into plasma. Now you can see here, let me show you what is what. This is the tissue area where the cells are releasing carbon dioxide, which is the waste gas which is produced. Now the carbon dioxide enters plasma. That means exchange has happened between the cell and the blood. Carbon dioxide quickly enters the RBC cell. This is the RBC cell. Now what happens here? The inside the RBC, carbon dioxide binds to water. There is water inside the RBC. It binds to water and forms carbonic acid. H2CO3 is carbonic acid with the help of an enzyme, carbonic anhydrase. Please remember this enzyme, carbonic anhydrase. right? Carbonic anhydrase helps in this reaction, and also in this reaction also we have carbonic anhydrase. What does this enzyme do? Carbonic acid is immediately broken down into bicarbonate ions and H plus ions, for which we need carbonic anhydrase. Remember, this enzyme is present more in RBC and very less in plasma. So once this bicarbonate ions are produced inside RBC, these ions come out. Now, where is this happening? This is all happening in the blood while the blood is, moving towards the lung area. Now, to balance the ions, the negative ions have come out to balance, the ionic concentration. Chloride ions, they enter from the plasma into the RBC cell. From where did we get this chloride ions? From NaCl. As you all know, plasma has NaCl. That NaCl is broken down to sodium and chloride ions, and the chloride ions immediately enter into the RBC in order to maintain ionic balance. Now this process is called as chloride shift. Now what is chloride shift? Chloride ions entering is called chloride shift. Now once this blood reaches the lungs, now this is the lungs area, say this is the lung area. In the lung area, these bicarbonate ions which are present in the plasma enter the RBC, bind to H plus ions. Then you can see the reaction is happening exactly in the opposite direction. Bicarbonate ions are formed. These bicarbonate ions are again broken down into water and carbon dioxide. Here also we need the same enzyme, and carbon dioxide is ultimately let out. From here, the carbon dioxide enters the alveoli to the outside. So this is how finally the carbon dioxide is transported from the tissues to the alveoli level. Now here, if you can see here bicarbonate ion is entering, in at the same time chloride ions come out. Again, since negative ions are entering, negative ions which entered exit out. Bicarbonate ions will enter, the chloride ions which entered previously, they come out. This reaction is called reverse chloride shift. So this is how carbon dioxide is transported through the RBC, and it is also transported in the form of bicarbonate ions, and it is also transported in 20 to 25. You can see here it is transported 20 to 25 through RBC, 70% bicarbonate ions and 7% plasma. So this is how transportation of gases will happen. And remember, every 100 ml of blood carries 4 ml of oxygen. Oxygenated blood, 100 ml of oxygenated blood carries 5 ml of oxygen, not 4 ml, 5 ml of oxygen. In the same way, every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood carries 4 ml of carbon dioxide gas. Please remember this point. This is a Neet related point and I want you to remember. So in the next class, we are going to learn about oxygen dissociation curve and what are the factors which influence this oxygen dissociation curve, and regulation and disorders related to this. Thank you.